The auditorium was buzzing with excitement, laughter echoing through the rows as people waited for the next act. It was a local talent show, the kind where anyone could sign up, from kids juggling balls to teens trying stand-up comedy. No one expected anything serious. It was all lighthearted fun. Then, slowly, an elderly woman walked onto the stage. She looked fragile, her steps careful, her silver hair neatly tied back. Some of the audience whispered to each other. A few even chuckled, assuming she had joined as a joke. What could an old woman possibly do at a talent show filled with loud, flashy performances? When the host handed her the microphone, she simply smiled. Her voice was soft as she introduced herself, but it was enough to quiet the crowd for a moment. Still, there was a playful mood in the room, and many leaned back in their seats expecting to be amused, not amazed. Some even muttered, "This will be funny," unaware of what was about to unfold. The lights dimmed slightly, and the background music began. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and for a heartbeat, the room was completely still. No one could predict what would come next. The first note that left her lips wasn't shaky or weak. It was powerful, pure, and filled with emotion. The audience froze, stunned by the strength and beauty of her voice. Whispers turned into silence, and silence turned into wide-eyed disbelief. This was no joke. This was a performance that would change the entire mood of the night. But what happened after that first note is what truly left everyone speechless, forcing even the ones who laughed at her to rise to their feet in awe. Gasps spread through the hall as her voice carried across the stage, clear and commanding. The old woman who many thought had stepped up for a laugh suddenly revealed a presence that no one could ignore. It wasn't just the strength of her singing, it was the emotion, the raw feeling behind every word. People leaned forward in their seats, drawn in by something they didn't expect. But while the crowd was caught up in the moment, a quiet question lingered in the air. Who was she really? And why had she chosen this small-town talent show to perform? No one in the audience seemed to know her well. A few people whispered that they'd seen her around town before, often walking alone, carrying groceries, or sitting quietly on a park bench. She had the kind of face that looked like it had lived through decades of stories, wrinkles etched deep not from age alone, but from life itself. Still, nobody could recall her ever being part of the community in a way that stood out. That mystery only made her sudden performance more captivating. Even the judges looked at each other in surprise. This wasn't the kind of act they were expecting to see from an elderly participant who many assumed was just filling time on the stage. The host, who only minutes earlier had played into the audience's chuckles, now stood frozen, unable to mask his shock. It was as if the entire room had been tricked, not by her, but by their own assumptions. As the song continued, a hush fell over the hall. But under the calm surface, curiosity grew. Who was this woman before tonight? What hidden story had led her here, to this very moment? And why did her voice feel like it carried secrets no one had yet uncovered? Her voice soared higher, filling every corner of the hall, and the audience could feel the weight of something unspoken in each note. It wasn't just a performance. It was as if she was pouring out years of memories, regrets, and triumphs into the song. Some people in the crowd began to wonder if there was a personal story behind her choice of music, something hidden in her past that explained why she sang with such intensity. The mystery only deepened as she continued, and whispers began to spread quietly from row to row. One of the judges leaned toward another and murmured, "She's not new to this. That's training years of it." It sparked even more curiosity. If she had once been a professional singer, why had no one heard of her before? A few older audience members began exchanging glances, as if her voice stirred a distant memory. But no one spoke up. For now, everyone remained locked in her spell. Behind the stage curtain, some of the younger contestants watched with mixed emotions. A teenage dancer who had been practicing all week clenched her hands nervously, realizing the bar had just been set impossibly high. Another contestant, a local guitarist, muttered that the night had turned into something far bigger than expected. The spotlight had shifted in a way no one anticipated, and now there was a sense of rivalry and unease brewing backstage. Yet the greatest conflict wasn't with the other performers. It was within the woman herself. Her face, though calm, carried traces of pain, as if every lyric was pulling something buried deep inside her to the surface. The crowd could sense it too. They weren't just listening to music, they were witnessing someone unravel a story that hadn't yet been told. The question now was whether the truth behind her song would ever be revealed. The song reached its middle, and the tension in the hall grew thicker with every note. People were no longer sitting casually. They were leaning forward, eyes locked on the woman as if afraid to blink and miss something. It felt less like a talent show and more like a revelation unfolding before them. Every rise and fall of her voice seemed to carry a message, a hidden meaning that no one could quite put into words. The more she sang, the more urgent it felt, as if she wasn't just performing but confessing something long kept inside. Some in the crowd began to wonder if this was more than chance. Has she been waiting for this exact moment to step forward? The whispers turned into murmurs. She has to have been famous once, one person said, while another insisted, no, she must have been silenced by something, and this is her return. The mystery surrounding her only deepened, and with it, the audience's fascination grew to a fever pitch. Backstage, the other contestants stood frozen. The teenager who had been nervous earlier now had tears in her eyes, not from fear, but from being moved in a way she couldn't explain. The guitarist who had scoffed before clenched his jaw, realizing he was witnessing a performance that would be remembered far beyond this small-town show. Even the host, usually quick with jokes, stood at the edge of the stage, his cue cards hanging loosely in his hands, forgotten. The judges scribbled furiously on their sheets, but it was clear that no number could capture what was happening. The old woman's song wasn't just music, it was a storm breaking open. The air felt charged, as if something unforgettable was about to happen. And with every powerful note, the anticipation for what came next grew almost unbearable. Just when the audience thought they had begun to understand her, something unexpected happened. The music shifted, softening into a haunting melody, and her voice dropped lower, carrying a tone so raw that it silenced even the faint whispers in the crowd. Her hand trembled slightly as she held the microphone, and for a moment it looked as though she might falter. The audience held their breath, uncertain if she could continue. But then, instead of breaking, she delivered a verse so powerful and heart-wrenching that it felt like the entire hall was holding her secrets in their hands. That was when the real twist began to emerge. A man in the audience, older and sharply dressed, suddenly sat up straighter, his eyes fixed on her as though he had seen a ghost. He leaned forward, whispering urgently to the woman beside him, who quickly covered her mouth in shock. The energy in the room shifted. This wasn't just a performance anymore. For some, it was recognition. For others, it was the start of a deeper story they hadn't expected to stumble into on an ordinary evening. The judges noticed the commotion, but even they didn't dare interrupt. The spotlight remained on her, her voice climbing again, stronger than ever. But the atmosphere had changed. Now, there was tension not just in her song, but in the air around her. Who was this man? And why did he react as if the woman on stage was more than just a stranger with an incredible voice? The audience sensed that the performance was building towards something larger than a standing ovation. They could feel that the talent show stage had become the setting for a long-buried truth clawing its way back into the light. And the closer she drew to the final verse, the more the room braced for the revelation that had yet to come. Her final verse rose like a wave, filling the hall with a strength that no one expected from her frail frame. The old woman's voice carried decades of emotion, and by the time the last note rang out, the silence that followed was almost heavier than the music itself. Then, suddenly, the entire audience erupted into applause, people leaping to their feet in a thunderous standing ovation. For a few seconds, she stood motionless, overwhelmed, her eyes glistening as the cheers grew louder. But just as the moment seemed to reach its peak, the man who had been watching so intently from the audience stood up. His voice broke through the noise as he called her name, not the name she had introduced herself with, but another, one that made her freeze instantly. The crowd fell into stunned quiet as every eye turned to her, and the look on her face confirmed it. He knew her true identity. He stepped forward, his voice shaking as he revealed that she had once been a rising star decades ago. A singer whose career ended abruptly after she vanished without a trace. Whispers filled the room as people realized they weren't just listening to a hidden talent, but someone who had once stood on far bigger stages. The The mystery of her sudden disappearance, the silence of years, now hung heavy in the air. The old woman, still holding the microphone, nodded slowly, tears rolling down her cheeks. She admitted that life had pulled her away from music, burying her voice under years of struggle and loss. Yet tonight, for reasons she couldn't explain, she had found the courage to sing again. The ovation returned, louder than before. But just as the audience thought the story was complete, she leaned into the microphone, whispered one final line, and left the crowd gasping, a hint that this performance was not the end of her story, but the beginning of a return no one expected. The crowd remained on its feet, clapping and cheering, their faces glowing with awe. The old woman lowered the microphone, her chest rising and falling as if she had carried not only a song but a lifetime's weight. Slowly, she smiled, a quiet, humble smile that said more than words ever could. The man who had recognized her stepped closer to the stage, but instead of questions or accusations, his eyes held nothing but pride. It was clear now that her disappearance years ago had not been a failure but a choice, a path she took in silence, until fate brought her voice back tonight. The judges, usually strict with their remarks, stood alongside the audience, clapping with the same unshaken respect. Backstage, the younger contestants, who had once felt threatened by her presence, now looked at her with admiration. The teenage dancer whispered, "That's what it means to perform from the heart," while the guitarist who once scoffed admitted quietly that he had just witnessed something unforgettable. Even the host, still holding his cards, finally found his words again, calling her performance the soul of the entire show. When she finally stepped down from the stage, the applause still echoing, people reached out to shake her hand, to thank her for sharing what she had once hidden. Her song had done more than win a standing ovation. It reminded everyone that talent knows no age and that dreams never truly disappear. They only wait for the right moment to return. As she walked out of the hall, her steps steady now, there was no longer laughter behind her, only respect. Her voice had turned out into wonder and her story into inspiration. And though the night had ended, her song lingered in every heart, a reminder that it's never too late to shine.